Working the night shift can be quite challenging, as things are always creepier in the dark. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. Right out of college, I got a job as a nanny for 2 elementary-aged girls. For the parents' anniversary, they decided to go on a week-long cruise, and I stay home with the kids. The first few nights, the 8-year-old would come into the room multiple times a night and wake me up. It was obvious she hadn't pre-planned what she was going to give me as a reason for waking me. She would just stumble through an excuse on the spot, like, "I just wanted to be sure that we were still going to the park tomorrow," or "I think I forgot to brush my teeth and wondered if I should do it now or wait until the morning." I figured that she was just missing her parents and feeling out of sorts, so I let it slide at first. But then by the 4th or 5th night, knowing I needed sleep to keep up with these 2 kids' activities, I told her she wasn't to wake me up unless there was a genuine emergency. I get a couple more hours of undisturbed sleep, but wake up with a weird feeling at around 5 AM. I turn over and nearly piss myself. The girl had brought over a chair right next to the bed and is staring down at me. It didn't help that she had long, dark hair, and this happened a few months after The Ring came out. Her explanation? "I just thought it would be fun to watch you sleep." I didn't wake you. Touché, kiddo. Touché. Number 2. I used to work for a relatively small security company. It was privately owned and had around about 30 employees altogether. They'd get a contract with a factory, and then basically, your job was to sit in that factory for 8 to 12 hours, when no one was working in it. So I would be working by myself and alone overnight, in a completely empty factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never saw a single thing that I would call supernatural. However, I did see Dennis. One night, my captain calls me up on my phone and tells me that there is a new trainee who will be coming around at about 5 AM, and to show him the ropes, as well as teach him how to make the rounds. It's about 4:45 AM, and I step outside into the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. After about 10 minutes, a car pulls up, stops, backs up, and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I had no idea why he left, but the car passed around 3 or 4 more times before finally pulling in and shutting off the engine. I can see him in the car, and he's just sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids, probably between the ages of 6 and 8. After about 3 minutes of wondering what the hell is going on, he gets out the car. Dennis is pretty funky looking. He's around 4'10" and fatter than damn near anyone I'd ever seen. He has a huge rash covering about 70% of his body, with a white crust outlining most of it. Then he speaks. "Had a little trouble finding the place." His voice is really high-pitched. I mean really high-pitched. I'm talking Judge Doom in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high-pitched. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without thinking much, I shake it. There's 1 finger on it. 1. And the rest of the hand kind of looks like a stumpy flesh mitten. One of the kids in the car gets out and has the same rash and is also very fat, and is also missing fingers. He says, "Daddy, can I get a drink?" Dennis turns around and screams in that high-pitched voice for the kid to get back in the car. I'm in shock. So I take the guy around the factory, show him the perimeter, tell him where the emergency stuff is, and about a minute or two into our walk, I notice that this guy smells like hell. I mean, he literally reeks of a ball of sweat and fresh diarrhea. The whole time, he's asking me strange questions like, "Do you have a crush on anyone that works here?" Or, "Can I hunt on this property?" He finally leaves after standing in the office trying to make small talk with me for about 15 minutes. On his way out, he said, "We're going to be good friends, even if you don't think so now." I went home about 2 hours later and stood in the shower for a solid hour washing myself, trying to get the image of that guy out of my head. I called my captain and asked him to reassign me to somewhere else. I never did have to see him again. It's been more than 10 years now, and it still bothers me. But I do feel sorry for him. Number 3. I used to work at a rehab center, way out in the country, on the graveyard shift. I checked on the clients to make sure no one was screwing around, and that no one ran away. Supposedly the place was an old spa that was bought out years and years ago when the original owner died of lung cancer. The whole building was self-contained with locks on every door. Locks. Mind you, that I was the only one who had the keys. Not even the ventilation systems were linked in any way to any other buildings. Creepy shit happened in the day room/kitchen area all the time. But there were 2 events that stand out in my mind. The first was the coughing. When you were in the day room's bathroom, occasionally, you could hear the sound of someone coughing up a lung in the day room area where the couches were. Mind you, the very clear sound of someone coughing very loudly in a place that would be quite impossible for someone without the tech who had the keys knowing about at 3 AM is a little unnerving. However, that's nothing compared to what I saw next. Several of us night techs saw the smoking man. You'd walk by this little lounge called the Serenity Room. Everything had a bullshit name in that high-end rehab center, where there was a rather large, wing-back chair facing the fireplace. Every so often, if someone forgot to close the doors, you'd see the chair move to face the doorway, to where the shadows of the room just barely covered the chair. You'd see the glowing embers of cigarettes just where a person's mouth would be. I watched it one day, because I was convinced I was just seeing a trick of the light. As I watched, the ember got brighter, as if someone was sucking it on a cigarette, and I saw the hazy outline of a bearded man's face. I hated working that shift. Number 4. I used to work in one of the booths at a parking ramp for one of the biggest hospitals in the area. The ramp had 2 lanes, and the bathroom was in the secondary booth. They only opened it during rushes during the day. I worked until 3 AM, and every time I had to use the bathroom, I had to go over to the other booth. Also, I drank a lot of coffee and have a small bladder. This detail was important. One night, a doctor was leaving, and everything seemed normal. She paid, I hit the cash button, and the gate opened. She started to drive away when the following happened. The doctor says, "Oh, I was wondering, do your booths lock the windows and doors? Yes, I reply. The doctor goes, oh, okay. Because the building right next to the ramp is the psych ward. Sometimes the patients escape, and I wanted to make sure you were safe. Well, good night. And she drove off. I was left to think about this for the last 2 hours of my shift, trying to hold it together until my shift was over, and I could go back to the office and pee in safety. Number 5. I used to work in a hotel as a night auditor. The hotel is in a hamlet called Dead Man's Flats. The name is based off an old native tale, but basically a man gets jealous of his brother and kills him near his farm, and that's where the town got its name. We would always joke that the hamlet was haunted, and that our hotel was built on top of native burial ground. The hotel had 4 buildings, and had about 80 to 90 rooms. In our winter months we are very quiet, and there were times that we would have no guests at all in the hotel for several days. So you'd show up for your shift, and would literally be the only person in the complex for 8 hours. The following happened on one of those nights. I got a 911 call to our switchboard. When 911 is dialed from any guest room phone, the switchboard goes crazy, and it tells you the room number. So I immediately dial the room back to see if everything is okay. No answer. So I try again. No answer. So I grab my master keys and walk down the hallway to the room. Knock on the door. No answer. Knock again. No answer. So I opened the door to the room, announced myself, and then looked over all the room for a person. Nobody was in the room. No doors or windows were open. So who the hell dialed 911 in the middle of the night? After that incident, every once in a while I would notice that the door would be cracked open, even though the room wouldn't be rented at the time. Several nights, I heard a car alarm going off in the parkade around one of the corners. As soon as you walk around the corner, the alarm stops. I've had 2 co-workers experience the same situation multiple times. A few of them had heard weird noises from the stairwell in empty buildings, like deep raspy screaming. The elevator would sometimes open randomly when you walked past it. It's not terrifying, but it's enough to make me believe that I was not dreaming when I see these things happen, and learning that my co-workers have similar experiences that creep them the hell out. Number 6. I worked the graveyard shift alone at a 24-hour Subway. The sandwich shop, not the transit station. About half of the customers were military guys who were also working the graveyard shift on base, as we happened to be located right next to an Air Force base, and roughly half of the customers were drunk people coming over from nearby bars. A small sliver of our customers were mentally ill homeless people and drug addicts who were just attracted to an establishment that was open at 3 in the morning. One night at about 3 AM, a man comes up to the counter as though he is going to have me start putting together a Subway sandwich. He's wearing a big coat, which seemed odd since this was in a warm area of California and it was probably 70 degrees at the time. He's of mixed race, bearded, and appeared to be about 50 or 60. He just looks down and won't make eye contact with me. "What can I get for you, sir?" I say. He is just standing there, shuddering, making some strange noise. I realize that he's sobbing. "Are you alright, sir?" At this point his sobbing turns to laughter. "I gotta come out here to get away from all those big grey guys with the big eyes," he said, trembling. "Okay?" "Those with the big eyes, they're trying to take me. I had 2 children, but they took them away from me. They took everything away from me. I used to be one of the village people, you know." At this point, an Air Force serviceman and servicewoman walk into the shop and stand behind the man. The man throws his arm up into the air and says, "You go on ahead of me. I'm not in line. I'm not buying anything for myself. I'm buying you kids your sandwiches. You get whatever you want, I'm paying for it." The 2 soldiers politely declined his offer and went up to order their sandwiches. I assembled their subs, and they began to pay for them, when the man with the coat suddenly announces at the top of his lungs, "I am God. I am God." The 2 customers and I turn to look at the man as he proclaims, "I will prove my power." He begins by taking a bag of Doritos off the chip shelf and throwing them across the dining area. "Do you see my power? Behold my power." The 2 customers finish paying and depart, much to my dismay, leaving me with the Dorito God. I ran over to the phone and dialed for the police station. As I do so, the man loses his energy and in an instant begins sobbing again. He exits the restaurant slowly as I'm speaking with the dispatcher on the phone. She says, "Yes, we've gotten several calls about this man, but we haven't been able to find him. We'll be down there right away." Within a couple of minutes, I see the bright blue lights of a cop car as the police officers take the man into custody along the side of the highway. I always prided myself on being pretty good with dealing with the drunks and weirdos that would come in during the middle of the night, but that was one of the few times I actually feared for my life in that job. Dorito God, I hope we never meet again. Number 7. When I was 17, I worked as a busboy at a high-end country club restaurant. It was the sort of place where people paid all-inclusive yearly memberships. They could roll into the restaurant after 9 holes, stuff their face, and get wasted and head back out for more grass hockey. Anyway, the policy was that the restaurant closes when the members are finished. This could mean that you got to leave at 9 PM or 2 AM, depending on which members were hanging out. This could mean some late nights. One of the fun parts of the job was hopping into one of those staff carts and driving around the course to restock all of the snack shacks. These were little stalls that had sodas, chocolates, and other miscellaneous crap that you could jam into your face whilst watching a buddy 8 strokes deep into a bunker. Late one night, after a wedding reception, and after we'd fed and shot the shit with the band, I got shack duty. Everyone else was busting ass on cleanup and next day prep, so I went solo. It was an accepted practice to nab a couple of bars for oneself when doing the rounds. So I hopped into a cart and headed out onto the course. At this point it's getting close to around 3 AM. So I'm not sure if you've ever been out onto an unlit golf course at 3 AM, but it's a little bit surreal. It's not like you're in the wild. Everything is smooth lines and picturesque, but you're very far away from most things. There's a lot of fencing up to keep critters and people out, so never really had any concerns for being there late at night. Except this time, I'm at hole 6 heading up to the snack shack. It's a bit like a porta potty sized pantry. I'm in the cart when the door slams shut. Before I can react, someone screams for the inside. They are going to murder me. So I lose my shit and beeline back to the restaurant at the cart's top speed. I am absolutely shitting bricks and attempting not to think anything about being shot in the back. By the time I get back, I'm convinced that it's a prank, and everyone is going to be laughing at me. But my boss sees my face after I tell him what's happened. He tells me only a couple of people haven't clocked out, so it's not staff. The police come, take statements and search the shack. All the food and soda is gone. Interior is plastered with shit and blood. Random letters smeared on the walls. They found a hole dug under the perimeter fence, and I stopped doing night runs to the snack shacks. They actually ended up tearing that one down. Good times, but I can't think anything golf without thinking about that incident. Number 8. I was working the night shift at a care home. Only 2 people working at night. We get everyone to bed and tidy up, then sit down to watch TV and answer if any of the residents ring the bell. It's roundabouts 2 in the morning and the doorbell rings. This is weird as the home is in the countryside and is roughly around 10 miles from the nearest village. We go to investigate and find a man at the front door. He asks if he can use the phone as his car is broken down. He isn't allowed in, but we offer to phone a tow truck for him. He agrees. We go get the phone, and when we come back, he's gone. Weird. We think maybe he's just gone back to his car for something. We go back, sit down, but can see down the corridor that the man is now inside, standing in the TV room. He doesn't see us, so we run and hide. We still have the phone, so call the cops, but they take a while to arrive. About 15 minutes later, the cops show up. We let them in, and they search the place and calm us down. The man isn't found anywhere, and we call management to send some more staff out to stay with us during the night. The manager arrives, and the police leave. We're back, watching TV and chatting. We're a bit calmer now, when we hear the front door open and close. We go investigate, start calling the cops again, and when we look out the window we see the man running away down the driveway. He'd been in the home the entire time the cops were there. No idea what he wanted. Very glad I don't work there anymore. Night shifts are creepy enough in a care home even without intruders. Number 9. I worked for a website for a very long time, and often had the night shift. At night, watching and monitoring user activity is fairly standard and boring. Nothing ever happens as most of them have gone to sleep. We did have our fair share of international users. They were rarely ever in droves, and you'd see them in the morning or afternoon hours in the US. So this meant I was the only person who was around most evenings. It was pretty boring at night. I'd usually just spend it interacting with other users and giving the occasional smartass a slap upside the head. It was never eventful. Anyway, one night I was looking through the user reports, and I got a message from one of the users informing me of some content that had been posted. They were panicking about it, but didn't specify why it was so horrible. Usually when a user panics, it means someone has posted another gore photo. I've probably seen them all. So I went to look at what they were freaking out about. It wasn't gore, but something far more sinister. Child porn. Some dipshit had posted a series of images of a young girl engaged in oral sex with a very adult male. The images were absolutely horrifying. Company policy was that I had to call my supervisor so they could come in and handle the situation and call up law enforcement, etc. So it was the dead of night. I had to call up my supervisor, and I had to wait a good 20 minutes before she got around. In this time, I basically broke down and could not stop crying. I didn't stay much longer after that. It broke me, and it stands as the most horrifying, disturbing and creepy thing to happen to me in the 3 years that I worked there. The images of that poor girl have been permanently burned into my mind. Number 10. I work at Quick Mart on the graveyard shift. I am the only one there for 8 hours. Well, I'd been working there for about 5 months, so I'd gotten used to the sound of all the weird noises. But when I first started, I was informed by a customer of an old man who used to work at the store, but died of a stroke about 2 years ago. So a couple of days pass, and I'm working a swing shift when the graveyard guy comes in to do the shift change. Me and him starts talking, and he asks if I have any questions about the store. I had everything down on lock by now, but he says, "Let me show you something." He pulls me into the back room, and he shows me this old man's jacket. He went on to say that our manager loved him, and just couldn't get rid of the jacket. My co-worker told me that sometimes on the graveyards, you'll hear weird noises. So a couple more days go by. Explainable stuff happens and whatnot, as in a cooler door propping open and then closing. A can on AZ iced tea will fall to the ground. It's all stuff with a good explanation and seems reasonable. Well, one night whilst working the graveyard shift and being on Reddit as usual, I hear a scuffling noise coming from under the side of the store. It goes on for about 5 seconds, and I'm kind of freaked out. I start thinking, uh-oh, what if it's this ghost trying to mess with me? Well, I look over, and there's a packet of ramen by the sugar. It's probably a good 5 feet away from the container it's supposed to be in, and it's kind of angled as if something was dragging it. So I got really curious. I went like CIA FBI investigator status. I started setting up my iPhone to record for 30 minutes at a time, just trying to figure out if it moved. 2 30-minute recording sessions pass, and the bag is still there. Hasn't moved an inch. Well, I forget about it and go back to work and take my phone. Literally 5 minutes later, I hear the scuffling noise again and get really paranoid about the ghost. The next day, my manager comes in and asks me how my night was. I kind of give her this weird look like, "Do you hear shit when you work here too? Or what's up?" Well, she says to me, "Oh, do you mean Frank?" And then at this point I'm like, ah shit, so there is a ghost. So I respond to her, "You mean the old man who died here 2 years ago, right?" She laughs and just says, "Oh no, that's Bob. I mean Frank the mouse who eats all our ramen packets." Number 11. I used to work in a lab where I would do behavioural testing on rats that would sometimes go very late into the night, usually past midnight as rats are nocturnal. There was a little creek behind the building on this college campus, and there were lots of bushes and grass everywhere. During the testing, I spent a lot of time in my car in the parking lot, waiting for the testing to be completed. One night I was in my car, and I noticed a coyote walking very nonchalantly across to the parking lot. He basically crossed the view in front of my car from the left to the right, coming about 10 feet away from the front of my car. I decided to open my door and stand up to look at him. I wasn't too worried about him attacking me. I just thought he looked pretty cool. So I'm standing there, and we're looking at each other eye to eye. A grey, very healthy looking coyote, with no fear in his eyes. As he passes in front of my car, he slows and then stops, and stands there looking at me. His posture isn't threatening. He's just kind of looking at me in the way that I'm looking at him. I am obviously thinking to myself how neat it is that I'm safe, and we can just look at each other for a moment. and then I start to double check whether or not I'm actually safe. I had figured, if he bolted for me, I could just get in the car and close the door. And even if he got to me, I was pretty sure I can handle him, with a knife that was clutched in my hand. I'm thinking this when it hits me. Coyotes probably don't hunt alone. I had one of those, he's right behind me, isn't he, moments. I turn around and find another coyote no less than 10 feet away from me, staring at me just as nonchalantly as the other one. I basically had a clever girl scene on my hands, and I remember what happened to the poor Australian guy trying to outsmart the raptors. Luckily, their behaviour didn't freak me out, so I was calm enough to just stare at it too. It felt like an eternity, but probably was no more than 10 seconds. After that, they just turned their heads and carried out on their way to the centre of the building complex / parking lot, where I got to watch them hang out and look for rabbits for the next few nights that I had testing. The next time I had late night testing, I didn't see the two hunters return to their usual grass mound under the big tree. Perhaps that's a good thing. Number 12. For reference, I'm a 20-year-old Hooters girl and encounter creepy guys all the time, but never like this. I occasionally get asked for my number and to go on dates by older men, but always politely turn them down without really upsetting anyone. I was working the night shift the other night and had a 40-something-year-old man sit at my table by himself. I greeted him the same way I greet all customers, lots of smiling, laughing at their jokes, ask about his or her day. He was really irritated. It didn't seem as if he wanted to talk to me at all, so I assumed he was there to eat and go, without all the chatting customers expecting from the waitresses. I offered a box and dessert at the end of his meal, but he just paid and got up to leave. When I brought back his change, he grabbed my arm and pulled me close and said, "I want you so badly," before letting go and walking out the door. I was uncomfortable and just stood there until he left. This was around 8 PM, so I told the other girls and got over it. We close at midnight on weekdays, so by the time I was ready to go it was around 1:30 AM. I carry a stun gun in my bag and normally have someone walk me to my car, but it was so late that nearly everyone had already left and gone home, and those that were still there were busy trying to clean up so that they could leave. I had parked right in front of the doors, leaving my car only 5 feet away, so I decided to quickly get into my car without being walked. I always lock my doors out of habit, and went to check my phone, which was dead. I have one of those crappy chargers in my car that only charges at a certain angle, and was trying to get my phone to charge when a truck pulled up from behind me, blocking me in. I couldn't pull forward because the restaurant was in front of me, and I couldn't back up because of the truck. At first I thought it was my roommate, who will sometimes check up on me if I get home too late to make sure I'm okay. It was a silver truck, which is what my roommate drives, but when I turned to look at it, it was a different model, which made my heart sink. This person then proceeds to honk their horn at me, over and over for a good 5 minutes, trying to get me out of my car. I refused because Mama didn't raise an idiot. He pulled up next to me and started knocking on my window and yelled for me to get out of my car. It was the same guy that was at my table 5 hours earlier. My phone wouldn't turn on, so I switched my car into reverse and fast and furiously drove my way out of the parking lot. He started following me with his truck, so I ran a red light and started speeding. He stopped at the light, and I drove for a bit before going home in case he caught up with me and tried following me to my house. I checked my car when I got home, in case he hit my car and was trying to let me know, but I didn't see any marks. I don't know whether he was trying to rob or kidnap me, but creepy man who waited 5 hours in the parking lot for me. I really hope we never meet again. Number 13. In the early 90s, I was working with a skeleton crew of about 15 people in a bra factory in Georgia, on the night shift. I was just 18 years old, but had recently gotten my first ever loan from the credit union, and as an intelligent teen, I purchased a bright red Porsche 944. At night, all the lights in the plant would be turned off, except for the section I worked in. One night whilst leaving, I noticed that one of the company trucks outside had left their interior lights on, but thought nothing of it, not my problem. The next morning, a duffel bag containing $750,000 was found in the cab of a truck with 50 kilos of cocaine that was inside the plant. The police promptly came and took possession of the money and drugs. A couple of nights later, an overseas trailer was dropped off, and it was discovered to have a false wall filled with more cocaine. They decided to leave it as bait, but no one came for the pickup. A few days later, my friend decided to just up and leave and go live in Florida, and I was totally down with this awesome plan. So I quit my job and moved with them. Back then, I thought nothing of this, but thinking back, I was in a plant that at the same time of night, some heavy drug operations were going down, and there could have been a guy in that truck crouched down when I noticed the lights were on. Had he seen me, I probably would have been killed. Then imagine how I must have appeared to the drug dealers. A dumb teenage kid buys a bright red Porsche, quits his job and moves to Florida, where coke deals go down all the time. All in the couple of days they lost millions in drugs and cash, whilst on my shift. Pretty lucky to be alive, to be honest. I work at an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You'd assume that it's safe as hell to be here, but then again, you can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old, and I work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewellery. It's usually teens and young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognisable. Same leather jacket, crinkled corners of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than the other, same slouched way of walking. He's usually harmless, but oh my god, the last few times he's come by, he has made me very uncomfortable. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them say they're just looking. He always smiles at me and always says, "Just looking, darling." At first I thought it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so year old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time I'm working the night shift, at the kiosk, whilst I'm surrounded by other shoppers as well as other kiosk workers. Although mine is kind of all by itself, usually between two empty ones in the back. The mall sales have been going downhill the last few years, and I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and has a chat on her rounds. She comes around every half hour or so, and she's one of the few friends I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago I was sitting in my kiosk, bored out of my mind, and the security lady has already continued on her way. I had already scrolled through Reddit and was getting ready to open up Netflix and continue watching Terrace House, when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him, and he gives me a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. A customer comes up, and I immediately jump at the chance to help him, trying to shake the creepy feeling I had. After I had checked out the customer and written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. But before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come and join me. "Evening, darling," he said, doing an almost bow. "Good evening," I told him, and proceeded to do his usual checking the display, not buying anything. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was, walked behind my chair and checked the sides, but never went where he couldn't see me. Then he started asking me questions, like we were long old-time friends. "So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?" I kind of guffawed at that, because I'd been single for over a year now. I told him no, I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl I found pretty damn cute in my local grocery store. "I see," he said. "Do you have any plans after work?" I was getting really uneasy at this point, and I told him yes, I do. I was going to a party. "You gonna hook up with any boys?" he asked. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was none of his business, but I just told him no. He smiled and said, "Good. You're far too pretty for those little boys." He faced me again and came up and hugged me. Until this point, I hadn't realized my heart rate increasing, and it only became apparent after I found it harder to breathe. Before he could actually do so, Linda, the security woman, walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to be buying anything from this young woman, I suggest you go loiter elsewhere." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice, as she's a very intimidating woman, and he left. "You alright, honey?" she asked. I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her, and she shook her head. "Let me and Russ walk you to your car after work today, okay?" I nodded, relieved that she offered without having to ask. The rest of my shift is fine. I get through it and manage to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up my purse and walk me to my little Prius. They wait for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stop at the gas station and fill up the tank. I'm waiting for it to fill, and I glance over and see the man from the mall at the mini-mart. He's buying a packet of cigarettes, and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves. He's holding up one finger asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out of the fuel hose and jump into my car, booking it out of there. I take several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few nights since that happened, and I hope he doesn't show up again. Number 15. Though I have a few paranormal stories to share, the creepiest stories sometimes involve people who are just plain weird. I used to work with a popular gaming company and became the shift supervisor from 10 PM to 7 AM. One of my CSA reps was a bit on the creepy side. He tends to freak out some of our female staff with some inappropriate jokes, which borders more on lack of tact rather than sexual harassment. He'd mostly stop if I tell him to. One evening, during our 2 AM lunch break, the girls would go over in groups to the nearby 24/7 KFC or McDonald's, which happened to be across the street, while some of us would go to various parts of the floor where we would hang and have breaks. The girls came back scared. One was also a supervisor. Apparently the creepy dude was at the main lobby, talking to someone who wasn't there. To make matters worse, he brought a weapon with him, and naturally my girls were freaked out. And the guys on my floor won't approach him. I was tired, swamped with work, and had a deadline report in a few hours, so I did not need this shit. I went down there and sure enough, Angel, my creepy CSA, is having a livid conversation with Air. I followed him all the way through the elevator landing, where he was having an argument with some invisible person. He reminded me of an angry Italian with hand gestures. Normally, I would be freaked out too, but since I was hangry, that overloaded my fear. Oh, and the weapon? It was a kendo sword. I took kendo in my college years, which he would swing around a bit. Pretty much the guy was schizo freaking out, and he also had a glassy look in his eyes. I yelled, "Angel, what are you doing?" He turned to face me, just staring at me. We had a bit of a stare-off for a few seconds, but again, I wasn't having any of it and said, "Dude, you know bringing a sword to the office is against company policy. Are you done with the report, yada yada?" And like a switch that just turned on, he finally responded how his dead sister was following him and harassing him, and was on her way to harass the girls. He may have touched the hair of one of the girls too, which, at this point, I was livid. I forgot exactly what I told him, but I told him to give me the sword and to go back to the office and finish work. He obediently complied, and about an hour after, I made the whole "come see me in my office" routine, spoke to my managers, which he was given some sort of disciplinary for, but he wasn't fired for the incident. And from that day forth, he was kind of scared of me. Anyway, I kept my eye on that guy for the remainder of my time with the company, as I'm dead sure he was legit crazy. I also told him if he needs help with his sister to seek professional help. He did a few more creepy things, and would still talk to thin air or walls or a pencil case, but nothing as bad as the incident with the kendo sword. On my last day with the company, he gave me his kendo sword as a parting gift. He had carved my name into it. Pretty nice sword. It now hangs above my bedroom. Unfortunately, he got fired a year later due to creepiness and performance issues. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Living in this city, when I walk outside at night, I often see security guards at their desks working the night shift. Maybe one day, I'll ask them if they've seen any strange happenings. And thank you to anyone who came to the stream earlier. It was wonderful having you. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment, as it would really help me out. Thanks guys. And if you want your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. And if you would like to do something truly amazing today to help support the channel, you now can, via Patreon. You can find the link in the description as well as the links to my social media pages. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome. I hope you've had a great weekend, and I'll see you in the next one.